Today on the podcast, I welcome Mr. Bem Joiner. Bem Joiner believes in Atlanta. Born and raised in the city, Bem has a pure passion for its people and its progress, and his contribution to the city is what many folks attribute to Atlanta: cool factor. As a culture curator and co-founder of the creative consultancy Atlanta Influences Everything, Joiner has managed a variety of lifestyle brands and designed meaningful programs for clients like Sprite, Mississippi Department of Education, Truth.com, Jack Daniels, Nissan, the National Black Arts Festival, and countless others. He has also booked early adopter shows for Drake, Kendrick Lamar, and the Goody Mob reunion. Bem is also one of the founders of CreativeCall.org, which is a community service collaboration between Atlanta and Stockholm creatives, and was most recently the community engagement coordinator for the Center for Civic Innovation in South Downtown Atlanta. Ladies and gents, let's welcome Bem Joiner. Bem, welcome to the podcast.
Man, thank you for having me, Ryan.
I'm so glad you're here. So you grew up in Atlanta.
Southwest Atlanta, West End to be exact.
What does that mean to somebody who grew up in Atlanta if you say I grew up on the Southwest End?
I guess it's we identify it as the SWATs. I think Goody Mob and Outkast, that was like what the Dungeon family labeled it, Southwest Atlanta Too Strong, which is normally like Cascade, Camelton Road, Ben Hill. And so I have to specify and say the West End, because it's its own part of the SWATs. It's its own brand. It's not Ben Hill. It's not these other neighborhoods. It's a unique neighborhood. So I have to specify the West End.
If you were going to just take out a map of Atlanta and draw lines and say, these are the major sections of Atlanta, how many do you think there would be, and how would you list them out? So you got one, you got the Southwest.
And then East Atlanta, because of the brand that it's become, in the Inman Park area, obviously Buckhead, the West Side, Bankhead, and maybe if I want to go south, but that starts to get you into East Point, College Park. So kind of East Atlanta, Southwest Atlanta, Buckhead, and then I'll say south going toward East Point and College Park.
College Park. Okay, so if I start in the north, I got Buckhead. I come south, you identify Inman Park and Bankhead. Mm-hmm. I keep coming south, so now I get down near the 20. Mm-hmm. If I go east on the 20, you'd refer to basically everything south of Inman Park and east on the 20 as East Atlanta.
Yes.
Where does it stop? 285?
Yeah, I would say 285. And
like you said, Panthersville, would you call, is that all East Atlanta? Like as a general region?
I say Panthersville is more Decatur, like DeKalb County. And then I guess one thing you need to know about me in terms of my cardinal directions in Atlanta is I just got a car 3 years ago. And so my sense of direction is MARTA based. Like I know how to drive and I get around well and, Uber, bike, walk, but MARTA controlled my sense of direction for a long time.
How far did you live from MARTA growing up?
Probably 2, maybe 3 blocks down from West End Station.
Close.
Yeah.
So you just go jump on MARTA, get all over the city.
Yeah. There's only been a couple of times in my life where I've lived like a Doraville or a Lithonia where I wasn't in Atlanta proper near a MARTA station.
What did you do then? Is that when you got a car?
Nah. Lithonia was tough because Uber wasn't out then. So that was like walking that was like 5 blocks to a bus stop. And then I didn't have a car in Doraville, so I would Uber sometimes. And then when I didn't Uber, that was another 5 blocks to a bus stop. So the bus stop would go a while and take you to the train station. So that was like a savage journey.
When you lived in Lithonia, do you by chance remember who the police chief was? So one of my friends was a police chief there years ago.
No, and this would have been 2004, 2005.
Right, so he might have been the police chief near that time. His name was Manuel Norrington.
Oh, no, I never.
Fantastic human.
Okay.
Anyway, I just wondered if that randomness might appear. But.
Yeah, I was in Panola Road, that area, which has changed dramatically from 2005.
Well, all that development. Got that Chick-fil-A, got that Krispy
Never thought
Kreme
I'd see it
donuts.
like Chick-fil-A, but Chick-fil-A is really, they'll pop up anywhere now. But yeah, at the time, it was trees in that area.
If a Chick-fil-A pops up, that's a really good sign about the free cash flow dynamics of the area.
It is.
Right? Because they've done a lot of economic research.
We don't have, I say we, like I still live in the West End, but the West End doesn't have a Chick-fil-A yet.
Well,
it's got breweries.
Right. Well, independent guys who are just taking a gut risk. They're taking instinctual decisions, right, about where they're going to put a brewery. Whereas Chick-fil-A is way past instinctual, intuitive decisions. They've got a pattern, right? They've got a whole demographic team analyzing all the data of a neighborhood.
Man, I love it. I saw a former marketing director there's talk at Conscious Capitalism Atlanta. He just gave a great story about the money that they, most people say you lose money by not being open 7 days a week. And he spun the story about the money that they make by being closed on Sundays. It was just a great talk.
Well, I mean, it's interesting about that closed on Sundays piece because I was really interested to learn years ago from Dan Cathy. He told me the story of his dad, and he said that his dad, Truett, who started Chick-fil-A, originally closed on Sunday just because he had one store. He was the manager. He did a lot of the cooking himself, and he was tired. He's like, I need a day off. He's like, even God took a day off.
Oh, wow. They didn't give us that. They gave us this cool, marketing strategy story.
No, everything starts practical.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but he also wanted the day off because he also wanted to go to church. Right. He had his, priorities there. And then as he expanded, and he believed that every store should have a manager, an on-site manager who had ownership and who took pride in that particular store. And today, Chick-fil-A, if you're a great manager, you might get 2 Chick-fil-A's, right? If you're a great franchisee, you might get 2 Chick-fil-A's.
Yeah, I never did McDonald's. So my fast food job story started at Chick-fil-A on Howell Mill. I actually opened up that Chick-fil-A and the manager's name was John.
And you worked there?
Yeah. When it opened, he came to North Atlanta High School and recruited. I came back years later. This might have been early 2000s, and apologized for we stole chicken for senior skip day, and we stole boxes of chicken and put it on the grill. He had to know at some point doing inventory, but this is 10 years later. I popped up in there and he happened to be there, and I'm like, yo, thank you, but we also stole chicken. Sorry,
He was like, well, you're not the first one.
We might have been the first at that time.
To steal chicken?
It just opened.
You might have been the first one to steal chicken from that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. I'm sure that they have to deal with a lot of that. But it's even better that, it stayed on your conscience that long. It actually speaks volumes about you that you kind of carried that secretly.
Well, he was a good dude. And I actually met Truett Cathy because the training, before you got trained in the ideology. So 97, Truett was still around, physically involved, and got trained at the Chick-fil-A on Northside Parkway. And I remember him coming in just talking about the ideology. This was before you touched anything. So yeah, the vibe is much different than a McDonald's or whatever. So everybody's so cool and understanding that their characters would stick with you later down the road. You would think about them. So yeah.
Where does Chick-fil-A fit in to Atlanta culture? And what I mean by this is Like the things I've read, you consider yourself to be a specialist and have a lot of knowledge, particularly about Black culture in Atlanta. Would you say that's true?
Yes. I'm 45, so heavy in my age group, a little bit, in that Maynard, Julian Bond, Marvin Arrington Sr., that those are my OGs. Like, so I know their children. So they weren't my peers, but I like that. I was in 11th grade when the Olympics came. So anything in that era, I feel like I'm confident in that. This
is my question. Does Chick-fil-A ever show up in hip hop culture?
No, not as far as I know. I do know there was I think it was a Kanye line a couple of years ago where and I think the rapper Cameron said something, but Kanye said like, I love you so much or something, I get you Chick-fil-A on Sundays. So that was like the first like of Chick-fil-A showing up in a song, but in terms of like physical, like if it's in a video placement or like anything branded or a Chick-fil-A collaboration with a rapper. No, I've never seen that.
Well, because that's what I'm wondering. Because Chick-fil-A is based in Southwest Atlanta.
Yeah,
their headquarters is in Southwest Atlanta. What is Black culture's relationship with Chick-fil-A?
Well, the funny part, if you were just to take the filet off and just do Black culture and chicken, there's obviously a stereotype there,
right?
But it feels like that Black culture doesn't partake any more or less with Chick-fil-A than any other Southerner. Like everything is just is. Versus my company years ago, we did this cultural excursion project for Church's Chicken.
Mm-hmm.
And they had realized that they weren't doing, like you rarely see a Church's Chicken commercial. And there's KFC commercials and Popeyes commercials. So they wanted to do a commercial and they had this data, this crazy Darius had helped us land this project. But they had the data on who their tier 1 customer was. I think it was a single Black mom. Tier 2 might have been this Black male. Tier 3 might have been a Hispanic mom. And they brought us on to bring life to the data, because if you market chicken to Black people based on numbers without any storytelling or real life concepts, you probably make a cultural mistake. But what wasn't there was like the average white Atlantic going to Church's Chicken. So Church's Chicken is different. Maybe KFC. I know the Popeyes chicken sandwich became a whole ratchet thing. I think it started off genuine and then went ratchet at a point. But Chick-fil-A just seems to be Southern across the board with no face, just Southern, whatever that is. Southern like, church going.
Like Waffle House.
Oh no, Waffle House at this point is Southern, but it's Instagram, Georgia followers, or just probably just do hashtag Waffle House.
And what am I going to see?
What was that? Remember World Star?
No.
You remember World
Star?
World Star.
World Star?
Yeah, it was like, it became like this meme whenever people would fight, like it would show like hood fights, but it had become so large that it could be a fight at a white high school in the suburbs, and a kid would yell out with, they're taping it and say World Star, and Waffle House has become the memes of Walmart. I forgot, there used to be this site that made fun of Walmart culture, the wild, weird things that happen in Walmart.
Yeah, okay.
Waffle House is kind of headed that way too. It's still Southern, but it's the amount of fights and randomness that happens in there that's taken away from the actual food brand.
Got it. Okay. And Chick-fil-A clearly doesn't have any of that, right? Because Chick-fil-A is just like put together.
Yeah.
People behave in Chick-fil-A.
Yeah. Now, my dad has a condo in Midtown, and this was a couple of years ago, maybe right before COVID. You know, Chick-fil-A has their LGBTQ stance, and the one in Midtown at Colony Square, I was cutting through to go holler at my dad, and I walked through a very guerrilla LGBTQ kiss off. That it was like they all like flash mob pop up at this Chick-fil-A, and we all gonna like
to make out.
Hell yeah, yo! And I was like walking right through that. Yeah. So you know, Chick-fil-A, they always got it. They're gonna have to deal with that at some point. So, yeah.
Well, you know, I know a little bit of that history because I've asked Dan. Because you know, Dan's the one who got in trouble about that when he was running the company, and he had agreed to do some interview with, I think, a Baptist radio station. And I believe the question they asked him was something along the lines of, Dan, you're a evangelical. What do you think the Old Testament says about homosexuality? And so they didn't
loaded
right. And so they didn't even ask him like what he thought. I mean, because you know, there's a lot of LBGT members of Chick-fil-A at the corporate level in high up positions. There's LBGTQ franchisees of Chick-fil-A. You know, Dan, I know Dan personally. I've traveled with Dan. I mean, we're buddies. He's one of the greatest humans I've ever met. And he loves everybody. I mean, he is the least judgmental person.
I can see that.
You know, he's very conservative, like in his own life. You know, he's got his, you know, he's very careful in his own life, but he's a lover. I mean, he loves on people, is in non-judgment. I mean, he has so much humility. He punts all judgment to God.
I can see that. Right.
And so the irony of this notion that somehow Chick-fil-A is anti-LGBT, I think it's outrageously wrong. I think they actually, if they knew the truth, they'd be like,
man, if you bring up the Old Testament in any question, yo, it's a setup right there, yo.
It is a setup. But you know, the thing that I have this, one of my best friends in the world is a Persian Jew in LA. And we have a lot of discussions about the Old Testament because I've read the Old Testament, studied the Old Testament. He hasn't spent a lot of time studying the Old Testament. So I'm telling him things about the Old Testament. He's like, really? That's in there? I said, these people were messed up. Like, you know, they were just doing the best they could. But God seemed to love them and they seemed to genuinely want to try to know God. Right. And then you get to all of Christianity. I said, remember, all of Christianity is just a Jewish sect. It's like the tiniest little narrow part of Judaism that was started by a Jew and now has billions of followers. When I think there's only 15 million Jews on the entire planet.
Yo, my homeboy's a Rastafarian, and he's from Southwest Atlanta, Rastafarian. His dad is actually Oscar Harris, who built the first world of Coca-Cola and the jail downtown, I think Concourse E, maybe at the airport. And he's straight Southwest Atlanta, but he talks like he's from Jamaica. I guess once you become Rastafari, your dialect changes. We laugh at it, but
it's the kind of pot they smoke.
Well, yeah, but and I've gone to like this bingy thing with him where they like pass the chalice or whatever. And I remember one time, like we were talking about religion, and he was like, "Man, we don't really have any enemies. Like people might have problems with weed and the marijuana piece, but it's like no beef. And it's maybe because we're peaceful, but there's like another piece of not being taken serious. Like the actual religion itself, when it comes to all the other religions, like it doesn't seem like people take the Rastafarian religion serious outside of the brand of Bob Marley. So it's like, dang, man, you know, maybe some beef would be good. At least it legitimizes us, but like nobody's thinking about us.
When you're that high, it's hard to have beef.
Touche. Yeah, we're not laughing, Tark. We're not laughing at you, man.
I mean, you know, maybe the other way is true. Maybe the rest of the religions could use more weed.
Okay, is that where we about to go?
Well, I'm just, you know, when you start thinking about like peace in the world,
yeah,
right? The Rastafarians aren't starting very many wars.
Damn. Yeah.
Right. And it could be that more weed could bring peace in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think at a point when you start getting into the business of weed and capitalism, then it'll fire back up wars again. Like the business of weed is, you know,
the business of weed. So really now the problem is the capitalism around narcotics.
Yeah.
Right. Which really now you get into pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And the capitalism around healthcare.
Oh man. I remember my dad was talking about all of the science, and there's a lot of information on their cures, but there's no money in the business of the cure. There's the long-term money is in treatment and everything else. So I'm like, damn, so you can't get the cure? Like, well, the money stops after the cure.
Well, the best doctors in the history of the world viewed their practice almost like priests. So they wanted to help you live in health. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they weren't really making money off of your illness. And so the trouble is, as medicine moves into a bureaucratic state and a capitalistic state of a business, then it ceases to be that place where you come to me for me to help you find health. It's I make money when you're ill. Mm-hmm. And that's just bad incentives.
Yeah.
Right.
I heard that about the business of hospital beds.
The business of beds. Yeah. We've got the same problem in the legal system, right? That the lawyers have turned it into a business. Mm-hmm. And so now the legal system isn't about justice. It's not about like providing society with some foundations. Mm-hmm. It's about lawyers making money.
That's real, yo.
Right? That's a problem.
It makes me think about the YSL trial and like. Yeah,
tell me about that. You probably know a lot more about that than I do.
No, I just know like internet stuff. It's just
What are you reading? What are you seeing? What are people talking about?
The longevity of it just makes me think, to your point about the business of law, like there are a lot of people getting paid over a long period of time because this is, I think they've said this is like one of the longest trials in Georgia history. So it's just, you know, I don't know if people want it to stop, and it's providing its own reality show. There's like it's a multi-layered trial from, you know, playing the music in court, to the guy who was asked to, you know, tell on people, and like he gave like all nicknames and like, there's a way to talk about something, especially urban culture, like using slang and where you're answering the question, but you're not answering the question. And that is his own comedy case. So it's like this guy is telling on people, but he's not outright giving the specifics. And then when they ask him to get more specific, he's just like, man, you can play dumb or you can be dumb, and no one would know the wiser because they don't know your background. The judge, no matter what the judge does or the prosecutor, they just don't know your day-to-day, how you talk, what's in how your brain works. And so you can kind of Kaiser Sose this thing using coded language, and so some of that is going on, and I think they weren't ready for that.
Are they trying to use the lyrics as confessions, and are they trying to use the lyrics as a decoder?
Oh yeah, most definitely. And I think there's a documentary coming out on Netflix in a few months on and Killer Mike has been adamant about the use of rap lyrics. It's a slippery slope to me. Like I understand both sides, and when T.I. Had his trouble years ago with the guns, I remember him bringing up like Arnold Schwarzenegger and like maybe the Terminator or something. And from my understanding, Hollywood and guns and violence, and then music, it's different. The visuals, it's different. And so I don't think that when you see Arnold Schwarzenegger in person, I don't think he wants you to look at him like the Terminator or even treat him as such. T.I.'s real name is Clifford Harris. Now, when you meet him in person, does he want you to see him as Clifford Harris, or does he want you to see him as T.I.? I don't know. And so the lyrics,
who do the lyrics belong to?
Yeah,
do they belong to T.I., the notional character, the rap character?
Yeah.
Or do the lyrics belong to Clifford Harris?
And I think on any given day, I think depending on the audience is who the lyrics belong to. Yeah,
the harder part with a singer or a rapper or a musical entertainer is that when Schwarzenegger's on film, it's very delineated. I'm watching Schwarzenegger on film. I'm seeing Schwarzenegger, in real life. Mm-hmm. Obviously that's a little more complicated. It's a little less defined for the public.
Yes.
That a rapper is taking on a personality.
Yeah.
Right. Or taking on a role.
And then the business of music, back to capitalism and who owns the labels and who's at the top of the food chain at the labels. Mm-hmm. They brought race into that. There are not many high level Black music execs. And so they were trying to also look at high level white execs being responsible in these trials as well. Like they didn't do the crime, but they're encouraging the usage of this for sales. And I think, anytime a barcode is added to something, I think the rules change. Like once the barcode is there, man, all innocentness is gone from the thing,
I'd love what's your take on, I think there's been a lot written about the fact that it was white suburban males that made hip hop famous.
Yeah, before TikTok, yes.
Before TikTok,
it's different now.
Fair. But I'm talking about like in the 80s.
Yes.
Right? In the 80s, look, when I'm growing up in the 80s, and I've got all these white suburban friends that know every lyric to NWA, mm-hmm. and they're buying up everything that's coming out from Dre or mm-hmm. Ice Cube or all these guys, and singing it while mm-hmm. they're skateboarding. Mm-hmm. That was the money that fueled all the growth of hip hop. Mm-hmm. So in some sense, that barcode was a blessing.
Yeah.
But then the real question is, or was it? Because then how did that negatively affect the culture?
Yeah.
Was the culture better? This is an Irish problem. Was the culture better poor?
Man. That's a great question. I think like this past year as Atlanta was participating in the 50th of hip hop stuff, Crisscross would be brought up from time to time, but there were many conversations where Nicole Sage, who manages speech, and myself and others, we would have to always remind people about Arrested Development being from Atlanta, because Arrested Development, and they brought home the first Grammy to Atlanta. Outside of Will Smith, they got one of the first Grammys in all of hip hop. But because they didn't give off, they don't give off the money, they don't give off the stereotypical hip hop feel, like it seemed like they would just be left out of the hip hop conversation. Because they don't have on jury, they don't, So yeah, it's interesting.
Sexy Ted just walked in. We gave him a microphone. Might be a mistake.
Probably.
But we gave him a microphone. Ted Griffith, welcome. You were an interloper, but you and Bem were friends, so I said, come on over.
Yeah.
Tell me the story of how you guys became friends.
I had just hired the first person ever in my life, big responsibility. And he said, listen, I've got this guy you just got to meet. And I said, okay, sure. So we go over and meet this guy named Bem. It's like, how do you spell that? B-E-M. So I'm already a little bit confused on the front end, but we start hanging out and realizing that we have a lot in common and like each other, and starts coming over, hanging out at my house. I go over to the West End where he was at the time. And eventually it just became this thing where we're like, we could do some cool stuff together. And so one of the things we created was a event called Leverage ATL. And so it was Bem, myself, and a few other folks. The idea was just to get cool, interesting people in the same room and just see what happened. And so we had everything from, artists to entrepreneurs to social workers to hedge fund managers, ranging in ages from 21 to 65 and everything in between. And eventually Bem became my roommate, and we just hit it off.
So when Bem creates the company, is it a company, Atlanta Influences Everything? The company?
Yeah, company.
What does it mean to a guy who plays squash at the driving club when you hear the phrase Atlanta influences everything?
For sure. Well, I would say that, I'm probably a little bit more of an outlier in some ways because I know the whole story of how it came to be. But I think it's pretty accurate, and some of it even ties into the driving club, ironically enough.
Tell me how. I love these kind of connections.
Well, if you kind of go back historically to the Cotton States Exposition, that was really Atlanta's first big kickoff event, if you will, post Civil War, Reconstruction, all that stuff. And so the people who put it on were predominantly driving club members. The park was initially owned by the club and eventually sold for $1 to the Cotton States Exposition Company, which was mostly made up of the same people. They then in turn put on this event. There were some famous speeches by, Henry Grady about revitalizing the South. And that's kind of what started to put Atlanta back on the map and one of our first ways that we were influencing. So it's sort of funny, the squash courts being, abutting right up to Piedmont Park, that there is this tie, and now it's a much bigger thing of not just, our ideas and commerce, but, arts, music, etc., being our export.
Well, I mean, this is interesting for me because when I hear Atlanta influences everything, I think of hip hop culture and its reach. But what you're telling me is that Atlanta influences everything goes into white culture too.
I think it just goes into culture. I don't think it's white, black, yellow, red, blue, purple, or some other color that we haven't defined yet. I think it's interwoven, just as, you know, there's a history of people from different backgrounds and different races working together in Atlanta, you know, as they say, that the city too busy to hate. All
right. So Bam, so now you tell me, what does it mean Atlanta influences everything?
So when we coined the statement, my business partner, Ian, and I, we were pitching, this was toward the end of 2015. We had another friend that worked at Nike, and he showed us some sketches of some shoes that Nike was releasing in 2016 of 20th anniversary of the 96 Olympics. There were some Bo Jackson cross trainers in the Olympic colors that we had. And we was like, yo, we need to pitch a kind of an experiential marketing campaign to Nike to get these shoes out. Atlanta doesn't have many branded items like a New York and LA. The brands, I felt like they take from Atlanta culture, but they don't partner with Atlanta culture like New York and LA. And so we had the re-release of the Jordan 1s in Chicago. They did this big, like, cool campaign in Chicago, and Adidas had done a campaign for something where they put a big giant shoebox in Central Park over the night, and you could go inside the shoebox and like shop. So just these cool things. And we wanted to do something like that for Atlanta. And what we thought about was in Chicago, Nike said they did it because Michael Jordan shifted the culture of Chicago, like who he was to Chicago. And I'm like, okay, the Olympics is our Michael Jordan. That was our shift. So we pitched this campaign to them. End of 2015, the Nike exec said that, you know, it was cool, but Atlanta, we weren't cool and we weren't large enough. He didn't say cool. He said there were certain infrastructural things that we didn't have. We didn't have the bean like Chicago. And there were certain things that we didn't have like New York and LA. And he was right. But at the time when he said this was when everybody was kind of doing the dab and the word trap and shawty and many other hip hop kind of colloquialisms. These were, in my mind, these were Atlanta public school bus terms, like that are now, I heard them when I was in Stockholm in 2012. You could see them in Gen Pop around, and once that senator's son did the dab one time when he was like getting sworn in, it was like, yo, this is our neighborhood school bus culture that is being perceived to be urban culture, but it's Atlanta Black culture. And so I said, you know, dang, we might not have these certain things like these other cities, but man, we influence everything. And my business partner, Ian, is from Brooklyn. He didn't agree, of course, being from Brooklyn. But he thought about his own life. He came from Brooklyn to go to Morehouse and never went back to Brooklyn. So he said, well, you know, it could be true. And this is after Detroit versus Everybody, after that brand had come out. And this is a little bit after the Straight Outta Compton movie. And remember that marketing campaign, that year, everybody was straight out of somewhere. All the memes and pictures, just straight out of anything. And so this new age place-based branding vibe was about, and people had done these Atlanta versus all y'all and different things. But as Ted said, you know, the city too busy to hate, but none of our branding was sticking at the time. And so Ian, he said, man, maybe we should put Atlanta influences everything on a shirt and see what happens. And so that's what started it. Now, obviously it's a brash statement that if you wear it in New York or LA or other places, you know, somebody might want to challenge you on that. And I eventually had to do a TEDx talk on it. So we had to figure out what makes this justifiable? And, you know, if I'm talking to my mom, how do I make it make sense? If I'm talking to the public sector, if I'm talking to a white person, if I'm talking to a New Yorker, how does this make sense without me just sounding so emotionally tied to Atlanta? And because we were brand guys, we started off with the first brand that would just shut people up. And it was the silhouette of Dr. King. And you just take that silhouette around anywhere in the world, say, hey, this guy, he's ours, right? Yeah, this is Atlanta's guy. And what he's done for the world, you give us that. Okay, so civil rights movement. We came up with 3 C's. The second C, which if you want to put a color to it, would go more into white per se. The logo of Coca-Cola. Like, it's just worldwide iconic. You know, in the Coca-Cola office, they say there's the Bible and then there's Coke. So, and then obviously Delta and Home Depot, all these Fortune 500 companies, world's busiest airport, all these institutions of higher education per square mile. I think that's one of the highest in the US. So corporate commerce, we're open for business at a high level. And then the third C, which does kind of narrow back down into urban culture, is the Outkast logo. Now, while it's not as iconic in hip hop as the Wu-Tang logo, I think that's probably one of the most iconic logos worldwide. And then the Run DMC logo in that font, the Outkast logo would be a third, but it's what Outkast as a group, what they were able to do with hip hop, especially like the Love Below and Speaker Box, and Andre making Hey Ya, which got put as a pop record. But if you understand music, and so that's a black record, that's a black soul record. Well, we just got to, you know, it wasn't a hip hop record, but it was a soul record, but still having street cred, so to speak. So they were able to kind of do what Drake has done now in some form, but get into white homes at a high level while still keeping your street card, which for Black America, that's a hard thing to do, is walk in both worlds like that and be accepted by both. And Outkast, probably more than any other rap group, has been able to do that at a high level. And urban culture as a whole is what that is about. So not just Grady Baby born urban culture, but Atlanta being the Black Mecca, pulling Black people from St. Louis and Columbus, Ohio, Queens, New York, and they all coming here going to Morehouse and Spelman and Clark Atlanta, Morris Brown, all these different schools. So this Black melting pot, safe space for Black cultural expression. And those 3 C's, the civil rights, corporate commerce, culture, you put those 3 together, that's what justifies the statement. And so we were standing on that. And where it started to naturally open up, I think people did feel it was heavy urban. And then it was 2020, I think the election, the role in which the metro area played in the election, the actual Biden and Trump election, and then Ossoff and Warnock, started getting people that I knew from this kind of civic space and social impact space hitting me on Twitter saying, hey, you know, these looking at the voting, man, I guess Atlanta does influence everything. And I'm like, well, yeah, you know, but it seemed like that the election opened us up for a wider base of people, especially more white Metro Atlantans, to feel like the brand represented them as well. And I guess because the people who created it were Black and there's a certain tone, it felt Black, but we never said it was Black, you know, it's just, I guess it was implied. But now I think people want to have pride in their city. And the fact that branding wise, Atlanta just has not been able to, we haven't landed to keep Austin weird, or what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. We haven't been able to, every day's an opening day, nothing's really landed. And so, kind of here we are, so.
Where do white people fit into Atlanta culture as a whole? How would you describe that?
Oh boy, this is. So I've only had these conversations more recently with, people from your space, white Californians, more that have come here, like movie industry, and talking about Atlanta is used more as because you can make Atlanta into any city USA, so there are not many movies that are told from an Atlanta. Like I loved Baby Driver because, on all levels, what it showed, the cast felt like Atlanta. I think Donald Glover's done a good job as well, but from a character trope in a movie, I don't think a white Atlantan is identifiable in a movie at all. Like there's no brand. If a white Atlantan is a white Southerner, and unless you, I don't know what to do to necessarily have a white Atlantan in a movie and somebody that's white in Boston see that person and immediately be like, oh yeah, versus somebody white in Atlanta will see somebody white from Boston or whatever. And it's like, there's this character trope.
It'd be interesting. Actually, I'd ask Ted this. Ted, how much time would it take you if you had a room full of Southern white people, and let's say they're all upper middle class Southern whites from South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida Panhandle, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas. How long would it take you, if you couldn't ask them where they're from, to start to categorize?
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be, extremely hard, but it depends. If they're more, urban, living in a city, then in some ways some of the accents drop off. Like in Atlanta, I think because it is sort of a melting pot, you don't have that really distinctive twang because everyone's kind of coming and going versus, say, like a Charleston, which is a city, but people have been there generations. So, it probably takes you 30, 40 minutes to try to figure that out. It's not instant. Like, I thought Bame's Boston, is the character trope, and that makes it easy. I think in the South, it is a bit more nuanced.
Great point.
Well, and then how long do you think it take if I got a bunch of black, let's say, I don't know. I don't know where the class distinctions are inside of black culture as well as I do with white culture about like educational differences, because I don't know black accents well enough to know like who has a master's degree, right? Who didn't go to college, I don't know. But let's say that you identify, let's say just middle class black, Philly, Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, LA. I don't know what I'm missing. In a room, how long does it start to take you, do you think, before you're like, I know where he's from, and they can't tell you. You just got to go off culture, dialect, words, mannerisms.
I think the dialect, I think the West Coast, and I'm starting to be able to tell a little bit between North and South, Northern and Southern Cali. It's taken me a while, but I'm starting to pick that up. But the hood folks in LA, there's still a certain enunciation of the words that are clear. They sound educated. To a Southern black person, where the words, it's the Southern accent and we destroy, we chop up words like it's Atlanta, not Atlanta. So it's ALANNA. There's no T. And deep in the South is where you start to get. I went to college in Mississippi, so I'm finna, you know, what you finna do? I'm finna go, it's a whole new. And then obviously you get down in Louisiana and Shreveport, then it gets
Cajun.
Yeah, it gets, but a lot of times from an educational standpoint, it's not as much dialect as comfortability. And then what's funny, it's the same with white Atlantans. So white native Atlantans, to me, I might not pick up on dialect, but character. And white native Atlantans are naturally, there's a natural ebb and flow with the Black community. If you white from Atlanta, it's not even, it's like, oh yeah, it's okay, yeah. It's just, you know, it's not a big deal with groups of Black people because it's kind of the norm in some form, which I think that's how Ted and that was probably some unsaid stuff of how we naturally linked. Like I'm from the West End, but his grandmother was a guidance counselor at North Atlanta High School, and she worked at the church across the street. Now, I wasn't zoned to go to school in Buckhead, but by that time, white people in Buckhead overall, there was a kind of an understanding. It's like, oh, you know, these kids are probably bused in. It's no longer like a thing.
Because you were taking the bus from the West End to North Fulton, which is in Buckhead, every day. Yeah.
So that North Side Drive, you know how it starts, and it would pick up students along the way, and that really has set the standard for my life in Atlanta. Is that North Side Drive, because you could go from the hood all the way up to like beautiful houses on one, just one long street. And there's so much culture along the way. And that's kind of how I like to think I move now.
So true. I think of like, we could leave here, like this is like, a center of Buckhead, and we could drive to the Hawks game in 20 minutes, be at State Farm Arena, and we would pass through layers of Buckhead, right? However you want to start defining all the layers of Buckhead, down to Collier Hills, right? People in Collier Hills would say they lived in Buckhead. And then you enter Midtown, and then you go through the layers of Midtown, and then you get downtown, and you don't get through many layers of downtown, right? Because obviously, like, there's many layers of downtown radiating, right? And then you get to the stadium, and you do all that in 20 minutes.
And on the back end of the stadium is Vine City and the Bluff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And so you didn't get a chance to experience Maynard Jackson, Atlanta, or any of this. Yeah.
No. I moved here in 2014. So, I'm still trying to figure out, like, what's interesting about being a West Coast guy, right? The reason I ask all these questions is, like, I grew up thinking like I had no racial prejudice of any kind. I thought we were beyond all that stuff. But then what I found out when I moved to Atlanta is that I hadn't really been around Black culture, right? I had a lot of Black friends, but they were all kind of like very Caucasian very Caucasian Black people who had adopted a lot of like very white cultural norms on the West Coast. And so, of course, we all felt like everybody was getting along and there were no racial tensions because there weren't any cultural tensions, right? Everybody had similar culture. But when you come to the South from the West Coast, what you realize is on the West Coast, Black and white culture is very segregated from a cultural standpoint. So the parts of LA that are very Black culturally, I just had no interaction with, right? Not by on purpose not having interaction. It's just not integrated the way that Atlanta is, right? So, I mean, when I ask these questions, I'm always interested in understanding the perspective of people who grew up here. Like, when you go travel to other cities, do you think, God, the white Black relationships in Atlanta are so much better than they are in other cities. Not necessarily because white people and black people don't get along in the other cities. It's because white people and black people in the other cities are just not interacting as much culturally. Do you think that's true?
Bam, you can go first.
So I used to say, I guess before New Atlanta and gentrification, that unlike other American cities, that African American culture in Atlanta is so black. I mean, we had 3 parts of the cardinal direction. You know, the north side was Buckhead, okay, but and Inman Park, and they were like neighborhoods. We didn't really consider Inman Park a side of town. And so when you say the east side in old Atlanta, that meant kind of Candler Road, South DeKalb Mall in old Atlanta language. Then the south side, Clayton County and East Point, College Park. And then the west side, Bankhead, and Swats and Cascade. So there would be these sayings that you could run errands in Atlanta as a black person, go to different sides of town and not see a white person all day, but and somebody say, well, yeah, because you were in your area. No, I went to 3 different counties. I went to 3 different areas and didn't see it. So that's old Atlanta. Now, and Atlanta's always been countercultural. So what's interesting is that Atlanta, the Black Mecca, you know, in the 90s, and America's just kind of doing this thing, and now they say America's getting browner or darker. And if America's getting darker, Atlanta's still being countercultural because Atlanta itself is becoming whiter, Atlanta proper. Now the metro area is very brown and multicultural, but Atlanta proper in 2024 is becoming whiter. And so when they say number 1 in income inequality and certain failing schools in Atlanta public schools, there are no white failing schools in Atlanta. And there are no poor white. Cabbagetown was poor in old Atlanta, but Cabbagetown ain't poor no more. And the white people that were poor in Cabbagetown, they've been moved out. They don't live anywhere in Atlanta at all. They've been gone. Either they got pushed out or they left on their own. So there are no poor white people in Atlanta proper. So the income inequality is black. The failing school is black. The poor people are black. And at North Atlanta, when I went to Garden Hill, Sutton in North Atlanta, the multicultural was in Lindbergh, because that was Ethiopian, Peruvian, Mexican. They were all in Atlanta. No Buford Highway, little Buford Highway, but in Atlanta proper, where you could go to an Atlanta public school, was Lindbergh. And that's where all of the international communities stayed, and they got gentrified, obviously. Like, so I don't know where that group is at now. But Atlanta is is black and white.
Bam, I've loved having you here. It's been awesome. Sexy Ted, thanks for jumping in.
Man, thank you for having me, Ryan.
It's my pleasure.